Okay, welcome back everybody. We will go back to page 131, and that's the Huey Street Reserve Manawatu Lawn Tennis Club lease proposal. Now, I missed somebody off the screen that wanted to ask a question, so we are going back to questions. And Mr. Armstrong, and so Bryce, if you would come up, and also David, I believe you wanted to make a couple of comments, so you may as well come up as well. Okay. Won't be a minute, we just got a little technical issue. We're right now. So, Mr. Armstrong, are you on?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm here.
Okay, so your question, if you wish to ask
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. Thanks, Bryce. My question, just reflecting a little bit on the discussion, and I appreciate the reason for the tennis club wanting certainty of tenure, and I can understand the difficulty in predicting where the council might be in 20 years. So my question was, in terms of the options presented, has any thought been given to removal of the early termination clause for perhaps the first 10 years, but inclusion of it in the lease renewal, or some balance like that?
That's quite difficult to do in practicality in terms of a lease agreement. So the simple answer is no.
The difficulty, I guess, Bryce, is in how it gets drafted.
Yes, how it's drafted, and also, well, from a legal perspective, that's a bit difficult. Simply because you would be instigating a clause in a term that wasn't yet a valid term, which has some issues from a legal standpoint from a leasing capacity, because you're trying to put something into a renewed term which they may or may not activate. So there could be a possibility at renewal time.
A way of side agreement for the first 10 years?
It's possible, I suppose.
Okay.
Wouldn't be aligned with best practice.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
David, do you wish to make a couple of comments?
Yeah, there was just some questions earlier today regarding the potential interface between housing and tennis, and we did that came up when we were considering the potential amendments to the land. And generally, I don't see that a tennis club residential interface would be an insurmountable issue that would create issues for the housing development if that was to proceed, or the tennis club. So there were obviously potential lighting effects and noise effects, but certainly those things, a tennis club residential interface is not an uncommon one. So in terms of any potential impact that the lease may have on either the operations of the tennis club or the development of the housing, I don't anticipate that would be an insurmountable or significant issue.
Okay, thank you. So are there any final questions, councillors? No, that's fine. Thank you, gentlemen. You may stand down. So we'll go to the recommendations. And do I have a mover? Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Hancock, Councillor Hancock. So the recommendations are that the council approves entering a new lease with Manawatu Lawn Tennis Club Incorporated for part of the Huey Street Reserve, Palmerston North, for a term of 10 years with a right of renewal for another 10 years. And 2, the council notes the lease will not include an early termination clause. Do you wish to speak to that, Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, I'd like your support on this if we could. I think number 1's pretty straightforward. Number 2, there's been a bit of questioning and dialogue about. But look, if I can just recap, this club has a very long history, and I think there was a couple of members spoke about what would happen if the club folded. Well, it's about as old as this council. It was New Zealand's top tennis club 2 years ago. Its membership is very strong, and it's a family club with an emphasis on juniors. They've come to us several times and submitted to us. They know our systems reasonably well. Mr. Murphy explained how tennis and built-up environments work. I mean, you just need to rattle off the Parnells, the Christchurches, the Hastings, the Thorndons. Even in our city, the Squash Club, which is where the tennis club was originally, in Linton Street, has always been surrounded by residences. So I think almost every city has that. So that shouldn't. I mean, they should be able to coexist. The reason that they want. They don't want the early termination clause, and anybody around the table that's been involved in clubs will understand when you're trying to raise money for facilities, that the trust funders look for security of tenure. They're not going to fund something that might be there for a year or two. These are big ticket items that, especially a tennis club, you're talking probably hundreds of thousands of dollars to renew their turfs or club rooms or something like that. So they need that security of tenure. They've been there for a long time. I mean, I've been in this city back for 30 years, and they've always been there. I'd have to go through the archives to find exactly when they moved there, but it would be significantly decades. And before that, it was decades and decades and decades in Linton Street. So I think we have some sort of responsibility to partner with them on this, and they're good sporting operators in our city. So please do support this. I think it's worthy of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Other Councillor Naylor?
Yeah, thank you. I won't be supporting the recommendations in front of us. I prefer the option 2 that's outlined in the paper for the following reasons. I think the benefits of option 1 and 2 are well outlined, and if we went with option 2, that would give the certainty to the club, but would also give some confidence to council. So one of the benefits of option 2 that is not contained within the option that's on the screen in front of us is that this option provides council with greater flexibility should the facility not be operating in a way that meets council's expectations, i.e. facilities falling into disrepair, etc. So it gives them confidence, it gives them the 20 years, 10 years with a right of renewal, but also retains the ability for council to be able to monitor and assess the situation down the track. I do have a little level of discomfort about us locking into something for 20 years. I mean, when I think about what's changed in the last 20 years, we've got no idea what the considerations of a council in 18 or 19 or 20 years might be around the table, or even 10 or 11 years, to be honest. I think that it's prudent and to not remove the early termination clause. So if these recommendations fail, I would be interested in moving option 2 as outlined in the paper, being the 10-year term with a right of renewal for another term, 10 years, but without the removal of the early termination clause.
Councillor Denison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very comfortable advancing the recommendations as in the report. Several reasons. One is when we're doing the Huia Street Reserve, we actually considered the residential development, and that's going through an Act of Parliament. If we wanted to use it for the purpose of residential in the future, we should have probably lined up a conversation to do that process once and do it well. So I don't see a need for having residential moved into this tennis club space. The other aspect we had when we reviewed the purpose of the Park Road corner was we engaged with the high school to see if they had any future needs, and they actually come back and confirm that they had no need for that parcel of land. So why would they at this point have a purpose for the size of land of the tennis court? So again, I think we're not limiting ourselves because we've already had those conversations in recent times. And so therefore, the tennis club, I think, the certainty that it gives, the Mayor's already outlined, they're looking at ongoing investment in that space. I don't have any concerns that it's going to be not kept up as far as becoming dilapidated and not cared for. I think there is a high profile to it and a high interest in it. And so I want to encourage that longer term investment and that recreational use. So for those reasons, I'm very comfortable moving forward. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My thinking aligns quite well with the views already expressed around option 2, which I'd like to move as an amendment, provided Councillor Naylor is happy to second that and take it that way around.
Okay, if this fails, then we'll come back to that.
So
Oh, you want an
I wanted
amendment
to move an amendment.
Sorry, to item 3, sorry. My
Yeah.
apologies, yes.
No, that's all right. Probably the easiest way to test it is to remove the word "not" from the second.
Okay, you want that removed? So just remove the word "not." So we'll,
Point of order, Madam Chair. I don't believe that an amendment or recommendation can be a direct contradiction of another recommendation.
actually, you're
There
quite
has to
right.
be an alternative notice of motion.
Yes, because it's not, that was why I was questioning it. Yes, you are
Direct
correct, Councillor
contradiction.
Johnson. And we have moved that as a recommendation, so it is in contradiction.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, it's not in contradiction. Recommendation 1 is the same for option 1 and 2.
No, item number 2 is the amendment and it is in contradiction.
Oh, I see.
Yes, it has been moved. The Mayor and, so I'm ruling that it cannot be an amendment. So we will vote on items, after comments, we'll vote on items 1 and 2, and if that fails, then you can come back.
Thanks for that clarification. I would like the opportunity then to comment.
Yes, that's fine.
Great, thanks. My reasons around not being willing to support option 1 and the exclusion of the early termination clause really sit around the key location that this is and the amount of time that we're talking about. 20 years is quite a long time to effectively bind a council and a community around something that's actually quite a standard clause in most agreements. And probably the thing that I'm most concerned about is really the sort of expanding precedent around being willing to remove communities' ability to influence through that early termination clause over those sort of longer periods of time. To me, that sort of sits with a reasonableness sort of argument, and I've heard quite a bit about everyone needing certainty. I think that one of the areas where there should be certainty is that the community would know that they would be within their rights to terminate a clause early if such cause should arise. This is in no way a comment on the particular leaseholder in this case. I think it's a fantastic organization that's got a great track record. So this is more a concern around, in general, how we approach these matters. We've heard about, that this may put sort of major funding at risk. In my time at council here, anytime there's been major funding around sports facilities, it's usually included council as a funding partner. So I think that would be the opportunity for us to provide that assurance is through the fact that usually council is a co-investor, and that would be a reasonable point at which to take up any discussions around major facilities through a co-funding mechanism rather than trying to provide it through a lease mechanism as being promoted here. So I will be asking for separation between 1 and 2, and will be voting against number 2.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there anyone online that wants to speak? I'd just like to make a comment. I did ask the question around earlier on around the fact that if they'd got down to 20 members, but overall, thinking about this, is that the Mayor's quite right, they have been there for decades. And I think at the end of the day, if there was something absolutely urgent, and I can't see it on this horizon just at this point, that council required the land, I think the decent thing to do would be go to them and negotiate. And also if they were playing tennis and we had to move them somewhere else, then I think we would be reasonable to actually work with them to move them from that site. I would hate to think that a council in 11 years' time decided, I don't know, to put something on there and then just give them notice after all that time. I don't think it would be the right thing to do. So I think we would end up negotiating. So overall, thinking about it, I don't have a problem with that clause. And I'm sure that the tennis club would be reasonable if the proposal that the council had at the time, it would be of a, they would be reasonable about it. So that's my comments. Mr. Mayor, did you want the right of reply?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could I just ask one of the officers, that because there's been comments made that we are funding partners with them on surfaces. I've been here a little bit longer than the councillor.
We've asked the questions, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
So
all right. Okay. Well, I'll just go on my knowledge.
Yep.
I don't think we are funding partners with them in terms of surfaces. But anyway, look, there's no middle ground. We either do this or we don't do this. You can't. There's absolutely, they need security of tenure, and I suppose a lack of understanding that and we use the word community all the time, but actually this is the community. This is our community, and they want to raise funds, and how clubs raise funds is they need to go to funders. If they don't have a lease or they have a very short lease, they just won't get the funding. So we'd be better off to say, be really honest and say, look, cancel the lease and put them somewhere else, as the chair has sort of said. But I honestly think this is a positive thing for us, and we should be protecting the ratepayers of these people are doing this work by themselves. So I think it's a no-brainer myself.
okay, thank you. We'll go to vote and we'll split them. And the second one I'll do by division. Do you want the first one by division, or is everybody happy to vote for that? Okay, so we'll vote on the first one, and we'll just take it with a hand. So all those in favour? And okay, all online, so that's carried unanimously. So the second one will go by division. So Hannah, roll.
Madam Chair?
Sorry, 4.
Councillor Harpeter? Councillor Harpeter?
Sorry, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay? 4. Councillor Dennison?
4.
Councillor McCallard?
4.
Councillor Butt?
4.
Councillor Meehan?
4.
Mayor Smith?
4.
Councillor Naylor?
Against.
Councillor Dingwall?
Against.
Councillor Barrett?
I'm against.
Councillor Petrinas? 4. Councillor Johnson?
4.
Councillor Hancock?
4.
It's 11 for and 3 against, Madam Chair.
Okay, so that is carried. Thank you. So what I propose to do is we'll do item 12 now, as we're still on leases and we've got Bryce. So we'll move to item number 12, and that's page 141. Oh, sorry, before we continue, Mr. Armstrong, we didn't record your vote.
4.
Okay, thank you for that. So that's, what was it, sorry? 12-3. Okay, sorry, Bryce, over back to you.
Good afternoon, councillors. So, Yeah, it was requested that once the negotiations had concluded with Cafe Esplanade, a report was to come back to Council or the Finance and Audit Committee, rather, to basically confirm those negotiations, which is what this report is. So pleased to say that all terms have been agreed upon between council officers and the cafe tenant, to the point that the cafe tenant has signed the agreement. So the agreement is not executed yet. Council still needs to sign at our end, but to show, I guess, a show of good faith that they have agreed to these terms, Mark, the tenant, had signed that agreement. So I'm happy to confirm that. So really, not particularly a decision for council, really just informing you that those negotiations are complete. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Bryce. Any questions? Councillor Butt?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Bryce. If I remember it correctly, when we discussed it last time, I think we put a limit on these licenses. It says, and on page 142, 2.3, last point, it says that landlord may, at the landlord's sole discretion, grant licenses to a limited number of other food and beverage vendors. As far as I remember, we discussed that it will be limited to a couple of or 3 vendors, isn't it?
No.
No, the resolution was passed that it would be a limited number, but council decided not to pass an exact number of vendors, hence that wording.
I might be wrong. Thank you.
That was exactly the motion, Councillor Butt, so it is correct. Are there any further questions? Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question in regards to the setback suggestion around any other operators, mobile vendors having a setback from the existing cafe. Was that something that was raised and discussed, or has that been adopted in the lease?
Yes, it is reflected in the lease, and that came through the negotiations, and basically it was a reflection of we wouldn't agree in good faith to put a mobile vendor on the lawn right outside the cafe, essentially. But whilst it wasn't explicitly defined in terms of parameters of X number of metres from the cafe or anything to that extent, it was a way of reflecting that in good faith.
So is that in good faith, or is that in the document?
It is reflected in the document. I guess I'm just saying it wasn't specified in terms of X metres. It was just more the terminology used was set back from the cafe.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. There's no more questions, so thank you, Bryce. I'm happy to move the recommendation, I'll just read it out, that the committee received the report titled Victoria Esplanade Cafe Lease Negotiations Update presented to the Finance and Audit Committee on 23rd of February 2022. Have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Naylor. I think this is now straightforward, and thank you for all the, I think we've got a good outcome for everybody down there. So thanks to everybody for getting us to this outcome. Okay, there's no further comments, no one online, so we'll go to vote. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. So we'll now move on to item number 10, which is the Health and Safety and Wellbeing Report, October to December 2021, and that's page 115, and that's presented by Alan Downs, our Safety and Health Manager, and Wayne Wilson, our People Operations Manager. Thank you, gentlemen, for your patience. I know you've been waiting most of the day. Ready when you are.
Okay, I'd like to take the report as read, but I have a couple of comments based on the manual nature of the report. On page 101, the wellness indicator graph, particularly the Vitae pastoral contract line, the latest data reads 658, which is actually the year-to-date figure. It should have reflected the quarterly data, which is in the table above. Another comment is on the dashboard report. We were extra generous this time through with the critical incidents, and we had 2 double ups on that report. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alan. Questions, councillors? Anybody online? Oh, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Alan. Just a general question, I suppose, given where we are vis-a-vis COVID. I suppose I'm a bit surprised that we continue to see these reports and they don't sort of have any significant commentary around preparedness, given that we're now in the middle of quite a significant outbreak of COVID in Aotearoa. So just trying to understand, sort of from a health and safety reporting perspective, the rationale around not including what I know, through the organization has been quite a large effort to prepare ourselves.
I don't know if you want to speak to that, Wayne, because there's been, okay. The reality is there has been a huge amount of work around the COVID.
I'm sorry, Alan, could you just move your microphone closer?
There has been a lot of work done in the COVID area. Probably from the perspective of regular reporting, it's probably anticipated risk and resilience would have picked up on that report, and perhaps we need just to communicate better to who's actually doing it.
So I guess from my perspective, it would be nice to see that start to come in here. Would it be helpful and or necessary to have a recommendation from the committee to specifically identify inclusion of COVID readiness in future reporting?
You can pick it up anyway just because of your comments, so we can include it based on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further questions? Anyone online? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It's just a clarification. On page 21 at the top, there's a table, and it's headed Wellbeing Table, and then there's 2 comments. The right-hand comment, I presume, is year to date, which I presume is financial year, so starts 1st of July. But the left-hand column just has December. I'm not clear what's being compared in those 2 columns. So could you just clarify that?
Okay, so the first quarter is July to September, and October to December is the next quarter. So this quarter here is the October to December quarter, and the year-to-date would be the combined 2 quarters.
Right, so the left-hand column is the October to December quarter?
Yes.
Right, okay, thank you. It just wasn't clear from the description. And then further down in the same column, where you've got 2020 and 2021, those are different things altogether, aren't they?
They are, yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. One of them is regarding turnover. I just wanted to ask, with turnover sitting at the annual turnover at 17.87%, I just wanted to know if you could give us an indication of which departments the turnover is predominantly in. That's the first question.
Sorry, I was waiting for the second. Wayne Wilson here.
I'll give you the second in a minute.
It's pretty much across the board. I wouldn't say that it's, without going back and checking all the figures, that it's significantly higher in any of the departments than others, or any of the units. But yeah.
Okay. Second question's around annual leave. There's some quite high annual leave balances there. Is there any departments in particular that you're worried about that there's really high leave balances there?
Probably only in the waged area, which we're working on. There are a few individuals that have high leave balances, and we work on those on an individual basis. But yeah, other than that, no, just the waged area we do have that we are working on to get that down.
So when you say work on, do you give them a target that they have to take leave? Is that how you work on it?
Eventually, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Wayne.
Councillor Naylor?
Thank you both for the report. I support what's already been suggested by Councillor Barrett in terms of strengthening the report and providing some COVID preparedness information in future reports. But in addition to that, I'm wondering, there's obviously been some operational internal work done in terms of the assessment framework for vaccination passports for council facilities, and that process is of interest to our community, and as elected members, many of us have had questions around that. And I'm just wondering if it would be appropriate to be able to include some level of update on that in this report going forward as well. Or I'm seeing nods. So, and do you need specific direction?
No, heard what
Lovely.
you said.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No. So thank you very much, gentlemen. And I will just get the recommendation up. And the recommendation, I'm happy to move it. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. And the recommendation is that the committee receive the memorandum titled Health, Safety and Wellbeing Report, October to December 2021, presented to the Finance and Audit Committee, 23rd of February 2022. So thank you very much for that report. By the lack of questions, it's getting more detailed and exactly the information that we're looking forward. And just noting that those the additional information on COVID will be looked for the next edition. So thank you. Are there any further comments? There been none online? No, we're all set to go. So we'll vote. So all those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. So our next item is item number 13, which is the assurance review of CET Arena Development Project, and that's presented by Masuma, Business Assurance Manager, and Bryce. So ready when you are, and that's on page 145.
Afternoon, everyone. We are presenting today the assurance report on the CET Arena redevelopment project. Now, something I would just like to note is that we have also attached the closeout report to this report so that we can just discuss it all in one go and don't have to take them separately. And otherwise, happy to take it as read.
Yes, the only sort of addition to that would be ordinarily a closeout report would go to the Infrastructure Committee, but given these topics were quite interlinking with each other, officers felt it was more appropriate to combine them.
Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, guys. Anyway, who did you interview when you did this, other than officers? Did you interview the project manager?
That is a question I actually can't answer from the top of my head because my staff member did the audit and not me. Oh, do you know the answer?
Yes, we did interview the project manager, also along with myself and my project team internally.
Right. Did you interview the project steering group, which doesn't seem to be any mention of it?
No.
Did you interview the chair of the project steering group?
No.
Thank you.
Councillor Denison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in regards to some of the categories around the good practice disciplines that was not met or partially met, I just wondered about the impact that COVID had on the focus benefit management, when you've said about tracking the benefit of the project and then, or the benefit realisation plan, and how COVID would have affected the use that we might have anticipated and enjoyed from there. Can I have a comment on that specifically?
Yes, I can provide some commentary on that. So COVID struck right at sort of the beginning of the project. For those councillors who were here, I came and presented a paper to the Finance and Audit Committee. I might have even been council right on the day of lockdown, the very first one. So COVID played quite a, I guess, influential part on that, both leading into the project, but also throughout the duration of the project. In terms of the benefits realisation, ordinarily that process would take place as it was being formed into a program, I suppose, if we were to be aligning to best practice. So some of that work in theory would have been happening back in 2018, so pre-COVID. But definitely, yeah, I want to emphasise that despite all of the COVID challenges, this project was successfully delivered on time, and, well, very, very minor discrepancy over budget, which is also pretty impressive considering the added costs that were incurred throughout the project.
Thank you. And then just on the clear scope, where you've got the key documents required for that stage, it talks about business case, program or project charter, and the program summary sheet. When you say the project charter, is that what we would call the project execution plan? Where does the project execution plan come into this?
Yes, it is the same document.
So were you saying that was lacking in this project?
The project was transitioned through the master plan, so some of this, some of that work was undertaken as part of the master plan process. But in terms of the project as it was delivered, did it have a project execution plan in the purest of senses? No, it didn't. And hence in the audit finding that as a discrepancy. That's not to say that there wasn't any planning or there was an absence of not being organised or playing cricket in the dark, to use an analogy. That definitely did not occur, but was there a project execution plan or a charter? No.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, officers.
Mr Mayor. Oh, sorry, I've missed Councillor Johnson, so you'll have, yep, Councillor Johnson. I've done it to you again. I'm sure it's not deliberate.
Out of sight, out of mind. Anyway, thank you, Masuma and Bryce, for these reports, which I thought were very helpful and well done. So my questions are around the agreed action plan, which is on page 157, I think, of our papers. And apart from one reference, all of the others have just got ongoing as the due date. And I'm just wondering why that is and why we haven't got specific dates for these things to be actioned.
I think what we're recommending is a change in practice going forward. So it's not something that you can change but by a particular date. It's just when they arise, they should be changed. So the audit, well, our way of monitoring that would be through spot checks on particular projects rather than checking at a particular date if it's done by then, because we want to make sure that the practice continues.
Okay, you know what I mean? So we can assume that to mean that whenever any of these issues come up in future, so for example, when a budget's approved, from now on it will include an accounting of historical costs, for example.
It should, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And then I see that there was an action plan for the project management of, is that project management office recommendations that was done a year previously, and a lot of the recommendations in your audit report were the same. So were those recommendations from the PMO review not actioned, or how is it that we've got a second report, if you like, a year later that raises issues that were raised in a previous review?
I think it's a matter of timing. So yes, a lot of those recommendations have also come through in this review, but it's only because the review was probably happening at the same time as the project was underway. so they wouldn't have no one to fix those issues when they were in the middle of a project.
Oh, I see, yeah. So it's the sort of, although we're getting the report now, at the time that you're reflecting back on, the PMO report wasn't finished.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I understand that now. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Mr Mayor.
Yes, sorry, I did have some other questions. Following on from Councillor Dennison, it says here around the engaged stakeholders. Whoever did this, did they interview stakeholders as well? Because there's quite a number.
Some would have been.
Do you know who they interviewed?
Yes, we can go back and look at the documentation to see who was interviewed.
Because there was a number. And there's no mention of a project steering group for the key components which Bryce talks about and the 40 plus meetings they had with those stakeholders. Where does that come into it? I mean, because it says here, engaged stakeholders recommendation wasn't met. I'm just struggling, actually, if anything, we were over communicating with our stakeholders.
I think in general, to be fair, from what I did review was that stakeholder engagement was actually done really well. It's just minor improvements that we noted, hence we didn't put a fully met tick, but it was actually done quite well to some extent, and it was just minor improvements that we've noted for the future that could be taken into account.
Okay, and in terms of the objectives, project objectives, you are aware there was quite a significant independent feasibility study done by council officers?
Yes, that was taken into consideration.
Okay, and you know that there was an ELT project sponsor?
Yes.
None of that's in the report?
It's an exception-based report, so if there was no exception noted, then we wouldn't have noted it in the report.
Okay. I'll leave mine to comment, thank you.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is just a question around the process. Have you done this with many of the other projects, Masuma? Have you done these kind of reviews?
No, not for specific projects. This would be a first time that we've done it at the request of council.
Okay, and so going forward, will it be a practice that would you look at potentially going from this top to the bottom, so potentially looking at the stakeholder group right through to project team structure, etc., going forward?
Do you mean for other projects?
For other projects, not looking at this one in particular.
If we are requested to by council, then yes, we can. Otherwise, we develop an audit program that's driven by risk assessments.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Bryce and Masuma. I have a few questions. The first one on page 7 of your report, or 153 of our papers, under the section titled Governance and Enabling Decision Making, I'm just wondering, it does refer to the terms, the steering group in there. It says that the terms of reference were adequate for the steering group. But in the left-hand part of that column, it talks about terms of reference for governing body. And I'm just wondering, when it's looking at the governance and the decision-making body, is it referring to the council or is it referring to the steering group?
It would be referring to the steering group in this instance, so it would be specific to the project. But we would have looked at council and the role that they played as well.
Okay, so when it's talking about decision-making processes, it's actually talking about the decision-making processes of the steering group, not of council?
It would include both.
Oh, okay. Okay, and just looking at the page 167, 157, or 11, page 11 of the report. Looking at those recommendations, looking at the agreed action plan, looking at the recommendation number 6, it says we recommend PNCC perform budget and actual costs per PNCC system comparison more frequently. and that says ongoing. I'm just wondering if those actual costs and comparison, where would that actually, in future, if that was happening, where would that be reported to?
We are suggesting this at a project level, so at a project management level.
Okay. So in terms of this review, was the decision-making considered about how the decisions that were made by the steering group translated through to decisions that needed to be made by council as budget holders?
It was considered, so all decisions that were within the remnant of either the project control group or the project steering group were made accordingly, and any decisions that needed to be elevated were elevated to council.
Okay, thank you. Much.
Okay. Are there any further questions? There being none? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, we will go back to the recommendation. Would somebody like to move the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Naylor. I'm happy to second it, that the committee receive the memorandum titled Assurance Review of CET Arena Redevelopment Project and its attachment presented to the Finance and Audit Committee on 23rd of February 2022. Councillor Naylor, did you wish to comment? Or?
Yep, I would like to thank the officers for this report. I think it's been a really valuable exercise and it's been a very thorough report. I do want to make a few observations. I think the things that have been picked up in the report are really useful, and if we can ensure that those are acted on, I think that will mean some improvements for future projects. My reflections on this program, as someone who wasn't a part of the steering group and wasn't a part of the council when the Arena Master Plan was approved, but then did come in part way through that process, is that I did observe some difficulty with ensuring that all the budgets were appropriately, all the information that was appropriate for councillors to have was there, and for those decisions to be made about budget changes at the appropriate time. And I think the addition to the having the chair of the Finance Committee included in that steering group partway through did address some of the concerns that had been raised through that process. But I think definitely reflecting on this report, it raises some really important issues, and I think that's useful in terms of our learning going forward. But very happy to receive this today.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to disagree, I'm sorry. As the chair of the project steering group, and I know some people still don't like what happened there, but it was a really, really good project, gold standard. In fact, officers internally have referred to the cultural storytelling as gold standard. The fact that there was no interviews of other members of the steering group, the chair, iwi, others, there's significant partners involved in this. And I know there's a box ticking exercise going on here, and I appreciate that there was some very minor discrepancies in how the budget carry-throughs came through, and that was acknowledged and admitted by the officers. But as far as the project went, it was a huge project, and it started in COVID. There's no mention of the construction issues, which were significant. Broken stormwater pipes, contaminated land, and we never once came back to this council to ask for more money. We dealt with it internally with a fantastic project manager and officers all connected. If we'd gone through the traditional manner, we would have been back in this chamber either rescoping the project or asking for more money. It's just a bit unfortunate that hasn't been acknowledged. Actually, the integration of suppliers and procurement, I think, was outstanding. And again, maybe I'm just getting this wrong and I am playing cricket in the dark, to take an analogy. But yeah, I'm sorry, but there's no mention of the significant work that the project steering group did. Our real partnership with sport and iwi on this. that there was an ELT sponsor, that there was a feasibility study which underpinned what was happening there. Yes, there's a couple of internal boxes that weren't ticked, but yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm disappointed.
Councillor Dennison?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to have the exception report come through, and I think that's what we're expecting. I also found a few things a little bit surprising. These being having confidence around some of the things that have been highlighted as being not met or even partially met. When you think of the business case, it's been part of a master plan for the arena since 2014, and I actually believe it had origins prior to that in another form. And so this has gone through political cycles for some time to actually have not only political but community support to address the entranceway and pits at the arena. As far as our budgets go, we had a pretty prudent budget, and one thing that has been highlighted here, and I have had the concern because we don't get reported as often as we did in a previous way to the business assurance model that we've adopted now, but when we had the internal auditor, we would be able to identify which projects or how many of our capital projects actually had and needed the project execution plans and where we were at in that process, because that's something before you even embark on a project of that scale, you should have as your guide, if you like. And to hear that we didn't have one is concerning. And I'd be interested to know what other large projects we have, like the city streetscape projects and the like of cultural precincts and Te Manawa upgrades and all those other things. Just how many of these future projects we're planning for have developed project execution plans. So I think that has highlighted one concern that I have had in the back of my head since we've moved to business assurance. That being said, though, I believe as far as the Mayor's covered well, and I've also been involved with that steering group, just how thorough we covered things and bounced back with our key stakeholders to make sure everyone was on page with regular updates and input into the adjustments that were needed to be made along the project. And I would say that would be gold star also. It was had many council officers, councillors, plus those key stakeholders all represented there with regular meetings. As far as the business case go, I recall there was a report that come forward that assessed the arena against the other national stadiums around the country and showed that we were positioned with the highest number of events, particularly per capita, with participant numbers and spectators attending being very high, pushing for the case of an increased capacity at the stadium. So I'd love to have that report brought back up to light. Just to bring confidence to parallel with this, that a lot of those things I believe were in place and were executed quite well. The last thing I just wanted to, two things I still wanted to follow on. We engaged WT as our project management because we had a lacking or limited resource internally, and they do projects right around the country of of value far in excess of what the arena project was. And I would have thought their industry standards would have been well regarded and well recognised, and particularly for us to engage with them, to think that we had execution in that space that may not align to our draft project management manual, but maybe we could adjust some of the things that they operated with in the more fluidity and the on-the-spot decision-making to progress the project, whether we could adapt a little bit of both and. So I'm not sure, maybe that gives a question mark around our own internal manual, if that's really up to industry standards and actually fit for purpose in the worldwide nature of construction in that space. So I had some assurance around WT and their professionalism of what they brought to their program. And then lastly, just around the concerns that have been flagged around the focused benefit management and the benefit realisation plan. Understanding COVID did affect us. I know that we signed off on that project as we went into the first lockdown, and it was our first shovel-ready project ready to lift out, already contracted, ready to go. And when we come out of that lockdown, but since then, we've still been dogged with COVID lockdowns and traffic light framework. So we haven't realised that benefit investment yet, but I'm sure we will. So I have very limited, if not no, concern around that focus benefit, and we'll realise it in good time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any? Who we got on the screen? Can't see. Oh, Councillor Johnson. I couldn't see her. Go on. Over to you, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a few comments. The first one is that I think that perhaps colleagues who were on the steering group here, the project steering group, are taking some of the audit comments a little personally. And I would suggest that what we really need to do here is to understand the purpose of the audit and that it's to help us for future projects. It's not a criticism of those who are on the steering group. Neither is it necessarily a comprehensive report on everything that went well in the project. It's meant to be a highlight on areas of project management that could be improved. And so, you know, whilst I understand that when you're very involved in a project, like it can feel quite personal when something comes back with some, you know, potential improvements, I think we need to kind of detach ourselves from that and actually look at some of the very good suggestions that have come through for future projects from this audit report. And we also need to bear in mind that this is all learning for us, which had this report not been done, some of those things might have happened for future projects. So, you know, I welcome these sorts of reports. And I think we need to welcome them with an open mind and be prepared to look at how things can be improved. It's not a blame report. It's not, neither is it meant to be an assessment of all the good things that happened and some of the things that could have been improved. It's meant to focus on where the improvements are. So I don't think it detracts from the success of the arena redevelopment as a whole. And I don't think members of the project steering group should take it as any kind of personal reflection on them or their performance. But I do think that it's a very useful set of recommendations, and I think it's no coincidence that many of them are the same as came out of the PMO review previously. And so these are learnings that we can take forward, and whatever we feel, you know, we might feel we've done a really good job, it's good to have an objective look at what's been done and where the improvements can be made. And that's the spirit I think that we should be taking this in. So I'm pleased with the report, and I think it provides us with good guidance for the future. Thanks.
Councillor Harpeter.
I think Councillor Johnson's stolen a lot of my thunder. I was going to say very similar words to what she just said, considering I did lead a projects office at Massey. So I think that in giving some feedback back to the officer that wrote the report, it would have been good to have got a more rounded report from, which is where I think some of the councillors were coming from, to talk to some of the stakeholders. And I think that's the feedback that was coming back, and that's the feedback that what we were trying to give is just to say, yep, that's really good to get that feedback that you've given the whole council, but what the feedback giving back to do future reports is that could we do a future report on these projects to say what is coming from every aspect of the project. And I think that's where Councillor Johnson's coming from as well. I think it's a more rounded report rather than just a singular report, which is looking at all aspects of the project. So that's all I really wanted to say. And it's just to give some feedback back to the report writer. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm comfortable with the report, and I agree with Councillor Johnson. I joined the steering group at a later stage, and I think from some of the questions at some of the council meetings, there was a few issues with the project when it kicked off, and that was around internal processes, and that was nothing to do with the steering group at all. So I think when, and there was an excellent project manager with WT, but I think a lot of these recommendations actually reflect on our internal way we manage projects, and that certainly came out with that PMO review. So I'm comfortable where it's sitting, and I'm comfortable, the reason I pushed for this one to be reviewed was because we had some financial, an error in finances, and that's been ticked off. So we're not happy that it happened, but we're comfortable as to how it happened, and we know that's been plugged in for future projects. So I'm comfortable where the report sits, and I think it was a very fair report. Go back to now do you want to write a reply? No, so we will move on to now vote. Vote to receive the report. So all those in favour, raise your hand. And we're all right on, so that's unanimous. Oh, sorry, I didn't, all those against?
No, I'm going to abstain.
You're abstaining? Okay, just note the Mayor's abstaining. Are there any against? And are there any further abstentions I hadn't mentioned? Okay, so the Mayor's abstaining. Thank you. Okay, so we now are moving on. We've jumped from that one. We're now moving on to item number 14, which is our committee work schedule. And are there any questions around the work schedule? And that's on page 169. And there's another recommendation. You've got a recommendation there, Councillor Naylor?
I thought you were going to move it, but I can if you like.
Yep, that's fine. I was just waiting for it. I couldn't remember whether it was you or me. That's fine. Okay, so item number, another recommendation is that the following changes in the business assurance plan be reflected in the Finance and Audit Committee work schedule. The review of property asset renewals be removed. The financial delegation of authority policy review be reported to Finance and Audit Committee in May 22, and the sustainable practices review be reported to Finance and Audit Committee in August 22. This just tidies up some of the business assurance plan. Masuma, did you want to comment? Just
Yes, please, just to provide some context to why the changes have taken place.
Thank you.
So there was supposed to be the property asset renewals review that was supposed to happen as we speak, but when we were scoping that review and when we were scoping the asset management review that is due next quarter, we found a material overlap in the scope. So it was more beneficial to merge those scopes and do them as one review in the next quarter. And therefore there was capacity in this quarter to bring forward a review. So we brought the delegations review forward and brought the sustainable practices review to the next quarter from the end of the year. And those are the changes proposed.
If you just wait a second, are there any Councillor Harpeter has a question?
It's not about this.
Sorry, I'll come back to you. Councillor Dennison, was this about this? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is for Masuma. I just wanted to understand with your business assurance 6-monthly accountability report, or whether it's another piece of work with the project execution plans that come up in that last item. That used to come up in an audit setting. Is there a piece of work where you have your eyes over that type of internal audit process where we check that projects have execution plans?
Today was probably the first time I've heard of that practice from the previous division, so we don't have anything at the moment. Nothing at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that. That's helpful to know where that sits. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Harpeter? Hang on, Councillor. Is there any more questions for Masuma before I move on? No, you're right, Masuma. So, Councillor Harpeter.
This was a question for Cameron. I just wanted to know if he had a figure that I asked for this morning about the civic precinct about how much we'd spent year to date already on that project?
I don't have it in front of me, I'm sorry, but I have got the staff looking at it as we speak.
Councillor, I did check with Cameron at lunchtime, and that will come out before the end of the week, as discussed this morning. Okay, so is there anything?
I didn't get it. He didn't tell me anything like that this morning, so sorry.
He did say he'd get the figures to us, so I checked with him at lunchtime and he said he'd get it out before the end of the week. Okay, any other questions on the week? Mr. Armstrong.
You're mute.
Sorry, can't hear you, Steve. Are you on mute?
Yeah, he's on mute.
Take yourself off mute. No, you're still on mute.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, the machine's going very slowly now. Just an observation, I guess. At some point, we should be seeing a work plan for business assurance, internal audit coming through to the committee for approval. I just wonder when does that happen? A forward work plan for approval.
We have done that previously. Sorry? Yeah, December. Yeah, it was just in December we did it.
And that covers us all the way through to February 2023.
Yes, it does, and we can make any adjustments as we want to, if we want to bring something forward or add to it.
So would we not then be looking at for the next year a work plan sort of around December also, which would cover us through to February 2024?
Yes, and that would be added into our work schedule.
Okay, at a later date.
At a later date, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Hang on. Is there any other questions? Okay, so I'm happy to move the work schedule. Have a seconder? Oh, sorry, yes, I need to move both of them. Yep. Oh, sorry, we're echoing. It's a bit. Okay, so we'll bring them back. Okay, so we're going to vote. It seems to be okay now. No, we'll vote for both of them together. So all those in favour? And online, are we okay? Yeah, no one against? Okay, so that's unanimous. Right, we now move on to item number 15, and that's on page 175. After this item, I plan to take a 15-minute break before we go into the next piece of it, because it's getting on to 4 o'clock, and you've been here since 1. Okay, so page 175, and over to you, Ms. Suma.
Happy to take the report as read, Madam Chair, and take any questions through you.
Are there any questions? Mr. Armstrong? You're on mute again, Steve. Mr. Armstrong. You're on mute. I think there's a delay in his. We'll come back to you. Yep. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Masuma. Just had a question around page 183, which sort of summarizes the council policy review area. And just, can you remind me of the scope of that? Is that sort of just internal operational policies, or is that community-facing policy as well?
This was only for council adopted policies.
Right, and so in terms of that framework being developed, was there engagement with elected members around that, or sort of, I guess, how broadly, how did you approach it, and were elected members involved in it?
So I basically made the recommendation that one is developed. Julie MacDonald is currently developing it, and I believe that a draft is ready. I do believe she plans to engage elected members at some point in the process before it is finalised, but I'm not really sure when that would be.
Right, so with the next steps here being around ELT, we might surmise that it's going to ELT, and then there might be information coming to us at some stage.
I assume so.
Right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any further questions? Okay, we'll try you again, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Fingers crossed this time. Thank you, Ms. Suma, for your report. And I think it's very useful to see this information summarised. And I guess looking at it, the thought occurs to me we've got 96 urgent actions, of which I think 25 are completed. And so stepping back, I guess the question is broadly, is the process and the system working as it should? Have we got the right sort of categorisation and grouping? Have we got the right definitions of high? Because I would have thought by definition, if something's really important, then there should be follow through and action. So it's really, how is the process and how is the system working? Are there opportunities to actually rethink how we're addressing these matters to get better traction and better value from the function and from the improvement actions and opportunities that we identify?
Yes, absolutely. And there's always opportunities to reflect and review and see how it could be improved for the future, which is something I actually have done recently in the past few months. And what we have changed in our practice and our division is getting more involved with the units or the business functions that are meant to be implementing these recommendations and seeing how we can support them through the process, explain to them what the risks are that we are looking to mitigate, and take them on the journey so that they do feel like they're being supported and it's not something they look at in a report and then forget about. With regards to the definitions and what high, medium and low mean, I guess that's just something we review on a case-by-case basis on each recommendation, so it's difficult to assess, but we do take that into consideration.
And, you know, of those actions that are outstanding, the high and the medium actions, of which there are a lot, some of them are really quite dated. Is there an opportunity, I mean, has the passage of time, is the reason they're still there because, you know, we've been so constrained in resources with the passage of time, they're just no longer important or relevant? I mean, how frequently are we, if you like, cleansing the register to keep it current so that we're focusing on what's really important?
Basically, every time we do an accountability assessment and when we track them, we would be looking at those items and seeing how relevant they still are. In most cases, they are still relevant and the risk still stands. I can't speak for management, but if I was to take a guess as to what the causes are behind the lack in progress, it would probably be lack in resourcing and priorities, because with COVID and everything, we are having to fight fires more than be able to change processes for the future.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Suma. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Thank you, Ms. Suma. We haven't any more questions. Right, I'll go back to page 175 for the recommendation. I'm happy to move the recommendation. Have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Naylor. And that's the committee received the report titled Business Assurance 6-Monthly Accountability Report presented to the Finance and Audit Committee on 23rd of February 22. Are there any comments? I think that's straightforward. My only comment is that I would like to, I hope to see less high comments from next report. I'd like to see some of these issues being resolved, and I know that especially around the PMO, and I think looking at this is some of the reasons why we have some of the problems with our projects, because of some of that, you can see that it's resource lacking. There's a lot of resourcing with COVID and that, so, but I still think we need to have the pressure, and I'm pleased to hear that that Masuma will be working with the areas where we need to get the results from, so that these recommendations are just not shelved and then come back to here in the next report and we just tick it off again. I think I'd want to see some hard action by the next report. Right, Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only one item I just wanted to make comment on is those business continuity plans, saying that there's 8 still in progress, and the concern around the work being paused as we respond to COVID, because that's the very reason why they should be in place, is when we have business disruption, and the uncertainty is to actually know what our contingency plans are and how we'll operate. For any reason we have to work off-site or work at another location. And there was a point back when I guess I'm more aware of this being a former chair of Audit and Risk, is that this was a reoccurring notation in the external audit for years, and then we got to a point where we actually got it, what I believed, addressed, and had some continuity plans for each department in place, is what I understood. And to think now that we don't have them in complete or in progress, I find a concern. That's for starters. And the second one, again, just re-emphasising the point, the reason you have business continuity plans in place is for that uncertainty, and this is the very reason why we'd want them in a pandemic, to pull them out the drawer and not be guessing what we should do. So I'll make that comment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We'll now go to vote. So with hands again, all those in favour? Anyone against? You against? No, okay. So that is carried unanimously. Yes, before we have a break, we'll just move into part 2. So item number 16, I'll move that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting as listed below, and that's item 17, Business Assurance 6 Monthly Accountability Report, and the item 18, Tender Award Contract. The first 17 is because of third-party commercial health and safety and gain advantage, and 18 is tender award contract for citywide tree maintenance, and that is because it's third-party commercial. Happy to move. Thank you, Councillor Naylor. All those in favour? So that's unanimous. So we'll be back, try sort of for 10 minutes and be back for a quick break and then back again.